Let's jump right into this explainer with a really fascinating puzzle. Why does the heavily sanctioned Iranian regime seem, well, virtually impossible to topple? For years, we've all seen the headlines, right? Protests, crushing economic sanctions, covert ops designed to weaken this government. And yet, despite all this massive pressure from inside its own borders and from giant international adversaries, the regime is still standing. It's like this structure was literally engineered to survive absolutely anything thrown at it.
So, what does this all mean? When we look at this question, it's super easy to just assume the answer is entirely about religion. And sure, the regime's religious extremism absolutely dominates our modern news feeds. But the true story, the real secret to its survival, is actually anchored in a 200-year historical loop of power, paranoia, and fear. To truly grasp why modern Iran is built like an impregnable fortress, we have to look past that religious veneer. We really need to understand the deep generational trauma of foreign intervention that shaped the whole shebang.
Section 1. The Great Game and the Pattern.
Okay, to see where this all begins, we actually have to travel way back to the 1800s. Persia, which is what outsiders called it back then, was suddenly squeezed as a strategic buffer between the aggressively expanding Russian and British empires. They called this the Great Game. And pretty quickly, a vicious pattern emerged. In the early 1800s, Russia forced exclusive control over the Caspian Sea. In response to that, Iranian rulers sold a 50-year tobacco monopoly to the British in 1890. But when Iranians pushed back, demanding a parliament to stop these foreign deals in 1905, well, the empires cracked down violently. Russia literally sent troops to fire cannons at Iran's new parliament. So the pattern was set for sure. Foreign powers intervened to exploit, Iranians pushed back for autonomy, and the empires aggressively cracked down.
Section 2. The Discovery of Oil.
Just as the Iranian people were fighting tooth and nail for their sovereignty, a discovery in 1908 kind of sealed their fate. Oil. Almost overnight, Iran was transformed from a simple buffer zone into the most vital naval and economic asset of the British Empire. And to put this into perspective, just think about the staggering inequality of how that wealth was split. The British established what we now know as BP, pumping immense wealth out of Iranian soil, and they were taking 84% of the profits. 84%! Meanwhile, the Iranian people, who, actually own the land, were left with a measly 16%. As you can imagine, this brewed a really deep national resentment.
And the world wars, they only accelerated this exploitation. Basically, whenever the global stakes got high, Iran's sovereignty went completely out the window. Take World War I. Despite officially declaring neutrality, Iran's land was completely ravaged. We're talking 2 million deaths from food shortages and disease. Just devastating. Then in World War II, when their leader Reza Shah tried to stand up to the empires and stay neutral again, Britain and the Soviets simply invaded. They exiled him to South Africa and just installed his 22-year-old son as a compliant puppet.
Section 3. The Stolen Democracy.
So out of this post-war era, a leader emerges named Mohammad Mossadegh. And he became this avatar for Iran's democratic hopes, promising to finally put an end to foreign control and chart an independent course. And by this point, oil had become the ultimate symbol of that independence. In 1951, the Iranian parliament electing Mossadegh as prime minister, and they immediately moved to take 100% control of their oil industry. Well, Britain panicked. They launched massive naval blockades to basically strangle the Iranian economy. Realizing they were losing their grip, British intelligence actually turned to the United States for help, convincing the Eisenhower administration that Mossadegh might fall to Soviet communist influence. Armed with a $12 million budget, driven by all that Cold War paranoia, the CIA utilized a totally ruthless tactical playbook to oust Mossadegh. First, they smuggled in operatives to quietly bribe politicians and pay off newspapers to run smear campaigns. Second, they literally paid organizers to flood the streets with fake protests, just manufacturing absolute chaos. And finally, they flipped elements of the Iranian military to storm Mossadegh's house, arrest him for treason, and place him under lifetime house arrest. It was a perfectly executed coup. Now, the contrast here just couldn't be sharper. On one hand, you have Mossadegh, who represented a sovereign, democratically elected Iran seeking full control of their own resources. But after the 1953 coup, the Western-friendly Shah, the same guy Britain installed back in World War II, returned to take absolute power. Backed by the CIA, he created a brutal secret police force to target political opponents, heavily censored the press, and even granted legal immunity to Americans in Iran. It was a perfect, terrifying echo of those humiliating treaties from a century prior. And honestly, it set the stage for an inevitable explosion.
Section 4. The 1979 Revolution.
Over the next couple of decades, the Shah used all that oil wealth to build a massive military, all while throwing these absurdly opulent parties in the desert for foreign elites. And this created a massive boiling point across all classes of Iranian society. Listen to how Ruhollah Khomeini, an exiled Shia cleric, tapped into this frustration. He said, "They have reduced the Iranian people to a level lower than an American dog." Khomeini brilliantly, and I mean brilliantly, fused a century of anti-imperialist rage with religious fervor. His sermons, which were actually smuggled into the country on cassette tapes, framed the revolution as divine justice against foreign control.
By late 1978, the situation hit critical mass. In January of 1979, despite martial law and intense military crackdowns, millions of Iranians took to the streets. The human scale of this revolution is absolutely staggering. Imagine 40 million citizens basically willing a regime out of existence without even fighting a conventional war. The oil workers went on strike, crippling the economy, and the Western-backed Shah was forced to flee the country forever. Soon after, Khomeini flew back to Tehran to an audience of millions.
Section 5. The Coup-proof regime.
Okay, returning to our original puzzle. Why is modern Iran so incredibly hard to topple? Well, we have to look at the system Khomeini built out of the ashes of the revolution. It was specifically engineered in a paranoid reaction to that 1953 coup, basically guaranteeing that foreign powers could never, ever interfere again. He created what you might call a filtered democracy. There's a democratic facade, right? You have an elected parliament, an elected president, local courts. But absolute power is hoarded by religious clerics. An unelected supreme leader sits at the very top. Religious councils strictly vet every candidate and law, and the morality police enforce strict codes. So the public votes, sure, but the religious filter holds the actual keys.
And this power structure is protected by an impregnable, highly redundant military fortress. Beyond the conventional military that's just doing standard border defense, the regime built its own entirely separate force, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The IRGC has its own ground forces, air force, and navy, all dedicated solely to protecting the regime from within. Add to that hundreds of thousands of neighborhood-level volunteer militias and special proxy units for foreign influence. It's like a giant puzzle with backup pieces. This redundancy guarantees that even if 100 top officials are eliminated, others are firmly embedded and ready to instantly take their place.
But to achieve total security on the global stage, Iran realized they needed the ultimate survival tool: nuclear weapons. The regime's pursuit of nuclear technology, along with their funding of those regional proxy militias we mentioned, these are highly calculated strategies. From their perspective, these aren't just offensive maneuvers. No, they are permanent deterrents. They are designed to permanently halt that centuries-long cycle of foreign intervention in their affairs.
Section 6. The human element.
Now, throughout this explainer, we've focused heavily on this paranoid geopolitical machine. But it is absolutely crucial that we separate the actions of this government from the everyday citizens living beneath it. Consider this staggering statistic from our sources. An estimated 80% of Iranians do not support the regime. Think about that. The Iranian people, who are known for being incredibly generous, enthusiastic, and highly educated, are caught in a really tragic reality. They are a brilliant populace trapped inside an ironclad fortress built by their own government, constantly squeezed between intense domestic control and external threats. So we leave you with this final, provocative thought to consider. We've seen how 200 years of the great game, oil exploitation, and a stolen democracy led to a regime that is perfectly engineered to never be overthrown. The true casualty of this geopolitical struggle has literally always been the Iranian citizen. Knowing the incredibly deep, heavily guarded layers of this coup-proof machine, we have to ask, will the Iranian people ever be able to break free from this centuries-old cycle of foreign intervention and domestic control, and finally chart their own destiny?